kind of historical context and backdrop to place behind passages in the New Testament about why those scriptures are for us as well. So, that's next week. This week, we are finishing up the life of Saul in an overview, right? Talking about how Saul is one of those villains of Scripture. Talked about the heroes and the villains, and we know that nobody's perfect in the Old Testament for sure, but God himself. And how some people, the way that they react or respond to certain spiritual situations reveals their character. And those positive character attributes are things we want to emulate. And then on the flip side of that, you have the people that are villains, so-called. And they're the ones during VBS that we kind of hype up and talk about as being folks that we don't want to follow, right? And so Saul is in that camp of the villains. But we did talk about his beginning. And I want to kind of give you a brief reminder of where we've been so you know kind of where we're going. We talked about Saul having huge potential when he first started out, right? So a couple of things that were going for him in the world of his potential was his heritage. We knew who his dad was, who his granddad was, great-granddad was, and there was even a mighty man of valor in there, so someone that was well known for his military tactics and attributes, and probably one major battle that he won, maybe by himself. That would have given that family a lot of heritage behind it. His appearance, what's the appearance of Saul? Tall, dark, handsome, as I say, it kind of hits all 3 points, right? He was tall because he was head and shoulders above everybody else in Israel. He was a tall guy. And believe it or not, that has a lot of impact when it comes to someone who's standing before you. If they're taller than you, you look up to them, literally, and then kind of our instinct is to look up to them as a leader, right? He was handsome, not hard to look at, right? Doesn't hurt you at all, right? When it comes to being a leader or a king of Israel. And I say he was dark because he's a Hebrew, so I mean, this is kind of goes with the territory. His humility. What can you say about his humility? At first he was. He didn't think he was anybody, right? He was the smallest tribe, small clan, small family. What's that?
He didn't think he was worthy.
Yeah. He wasn't worthy in his own eyes. And then Samuel was like, yeah, you're the guy, though. That's kind of a huge characteristic in being a good leader, is having the humility to be able to take criticism, to be able to look at someone else and say that I'm not better than them. Let's come to a decision here. And then finally, his potential in action. We see him when he was chosen to be king. He was busy about the stuff, the baggage, the things that his family brought. So he wasn't someone just waiting for his name to be called. He was actually busy doing the work, and then he was called from that location. So kind of an overview of that is the idea that for our leaders today, right, there's positive things to know about. If you got a person who's been a faithful member of the Lord's church for many generations, and they had that heritage, that's kind of a good sign. It's a good starting place. If they had the look of a leader, there's someone that can stand up and speak out and talk about things, that's probably good. Someone who is humble, who can kind of come to reason with other people about situations, is always good. And then someone who's not just kind of waiting around for their name to be called, but to be busy doing the work and then they're called to that office is a positive thing. So he had huge potential, but he did make mistakes. So we talked about how he would have known what was lawful and unlawful according to the law of Moses. And what's the point there? What's the kicker there? How did he know what was right and wrong?
It was the law of the king to write down the commandments of God.
Yeah, so the first thing that the king was supposed to do according to Moses in Deuteronomy 17 was to copy the scroll of the law. Whether it was the first 5 books or just the law part, whatever the case, he would have been knowledgeable about what God required of the king. Remember the reason why they were supposed to do that at the very end of that text? Deuteronomy 17, 18, and 19.
Well, he couldn't use it as an excuse of not knowing.
Okay, it's true. At the very end of that passage is that your eyes aren't lifted up and your heart's not puffed up above your brethren, but you know that you're one of them. So it's to prevent pride, right? When you're having to write out by hand as a scribe the law of God, there's a whole lot of stuff in there that talks about how Israel's not the best. They're not the best when it comes to their military might, when it comes to their numbers, when it comes to their stock, but God chose them and worked with them anyway, right? So, what's that? I mean, you have the intent in God's mind and you have the actuality, right? So we have a lot of things that Saul didn't do and that we sometimes don't do either.
Tinge of, I kind of felt sorry for Saul because he started off so well, but it's kind of like warning to us that if you're exalted because all of a sudden you're the greatest at your business or what have you, and you're getting all this blessing, to be careful that you don't turn the way that he did because he thought too much of himself.
It's almost like I thought about that kind of stuff. That's why we're talking about it. Yeah.
To make himself liked
He's in
by the
politics.
people. It wasn't enough to God.
He is in politics, I'll give you that. Whenever we see him saying the people, we do see him kind of have that twinge of, I want to be the liked guy. I want to be the most popular guy.
Because he's jealous of David because the women are saying, well, David came to kill 10,000 and Saul only killed 1,000.
Yeah.
And he wants that popularity.
It's an excuse. Aaron used it. I threw the gold in the fire and out came the calf. The people made me do it.
Yeah.
Here's Saul saying the people made me do it. They're the leaders.
Yeah, it was an excuse when it boils down to it. And the reason why we're mentioning all this is because it's relevant to us, right? In this story from Saul, easily you can just kind of read the text and say, all right, well, that's the life of King Saul. What's the point? And the point is exactly what we're going to, is that when it comes to us seeing leaders today and becoming leaders today, this is a blueprint of what not to do. You can start out having a lot going for you, and if you're not careful, if pride becomes an issue or popularity becomes an issue, if making excuses becomes an issue, then you kind of see the same trappings that Saul fell into becomes temptations for us too. I think about the eldership here. I've been here for almost like 9 months, something like that. And working with them has been stellar. I mean, I can't think of a better word to use than that because I came in here wary, a little unsure. I had talked to some people that had worked with y'all before and heard some things and talking with the elders in our first interview and conversations and addressed those concerns that were brought to me, and we talked about it and figured it out. And then where it really comes to the rubber meets the road, so to speak, is when you actually get into the work and you have ideas or you have concerns or you have people that may not feel as pleased as others with whatever, and then you see how the elders respond or react. And what you're looking for is you're looking for people that are not going to fall in those temptations of pride, but instead they have the humility enough to accept that they're not perfect and that they're going to hear feedback, and some of it's going to be useful feedback and some of it's going to be noise, right? Then you're going to have people that, when it comes to this issue right here, if things don't go well and if things aren't being blessed by God, they're not looking to make excuses, they're looking to take ownership of it and to be able to react better in the future. And so far in my experience, that's been the overall feel of the eldership here, just for what it's worth. So, Saul made mistakes, but he knew the law of God. Can you remember the two big mistakes we talked about?
He offered a sacrifice that only the priest was supposed to.
Okay, the sacrifice. He forced himself to do it, he said, because the people were scattered and Samuel didn't show up on time, so it's definitely not his fault. And then we have all the Philistines. They were going into combat mode, and he had to do it because he wanted God's blessing. Well, if he wanted God's blessing, listen to God's word. Don't do that, right? What's the second one? Okay, not obeying God's command about what? Amalekites. Go in there and scorch earth. They went in there. They didn't do that, right? So if you think about the people or the army not doing that, who is ultimately responsible for those actions? The commander-in-chief is. I mean, ultimately, he is to blame, right? Because he should have been the one saying, listen, here is what God said. This is what we're going to do. But instead, Samuel came up. He's like, hey, how's it going? And Saul goes, hey, so glad you're here. We just did what God told us to do. A bold-faced lie to Samuel of all people, right? And he goes, did you? Because I hear some sheep. I shouldn't hear any sheep because they're all killed, right? And they're like, well, we kept the best stuff to offer to God. Good intentions, but still not what God told them to do, which is a good little reminder for me and for all of us that no matter what our intention is, I used that line before, whatever is right, whatever is wrong. It's never right to do wrong, never wrong to do right, right? That old kind of cheesy thing that was taught to me at one point. It is helpful to know that no matter what our intentions are, the actual action that takes place is very important. And then, we never talked about it in the text, but do you remember or do you know what happened to Agag the king? Samuel took a sword and hacked him to pieces. Kind of descriptive, right? I mean, no details needed about what took place, but Samuel took care of it. He wasn't a man of war. He wasn't in the military. He was a prophet. But he was trying to make a point, and I think he made the point to Amalek, all right? Or Agag. Okay, and then one next thing is he passed blame. We talked about that already. Made excuses for what was going on. He wasn't taking ownership of his mistakes, of his shortcomings, of his failings. He was just trying to pawn it off on whoever he could to make himself look better. The offering, he forced himself. The Amalekites, I obeyed, but the people didn't. But he was the leader of the people, so there's not really a good excuse. He was jealous of the success of others. And we talked about David a little bit last week towards the end, right? I mean, David went out there and won the victory that Saul should have gone out and won. I mean, it is a risky thing, no doubt, to have, you get a giant out there, and then you have the king of Israel going forth to combat. That's going to be risky, no doubt about it. But who gave David the victory in that battle? The Lord did. I mean, all the way through, David is saying, listen, I'm just a shepherd. I mean, I killed a lion and a bear one time. That's pretty cool. But this is a giant out here. This Goliath guy is, cussing us out by our gods, essentially. And he's cursing us by the name of our Lord. Who's going to stand up for God? Isn't there a cause for us to go out there and kill this guy? And there definitely was. And David went out there, couldn't wear the armor, didn't fit right. And he went out there armorless, smacked that Goliath guy in the head with a rock, so much so it indented into his skull, it seems. He was passed out. And what did David do then? Went over, grabbed Goliath's sword, and cut his head off. Who gave David, that little shepherd boy, victory? God. Saul should have known about that whole thing, right? He should have been the one to go up there and say, I'm going to show all of Israel now who really wins the wars for us. It's not us, it's not me, it's the Lord. But he didn't. And then, of course, the famous, they're going back to town, they're victorious, it's a good day for everybody, no one's slaves in the Israelite camp, and they had the ladies come out there and they're singing, Saul's killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. Is that accurate? Not yet. It will be accurate, but not yet. And Saul throws a hissy fit about it. Right? He was once humble in his own eyes, but now he is a haughty, childish king. So, all right, any questions, comments about that stuff so far? That's a recap. Only took us long enough. Left David alone? So do you think you blame the people?
My mind's always thinking different things every time I reread anything.
Well, that's good.
And I just thought, well, if he'd have been left alone, he'd have been his little humble self and just done his little thing. And
Maybe.
That wasn't God's plan, apparently.
Yeah. It's funny how God's plan just so happened to work out. They really wanted a king, right? They rejected Samuel from being a leader or a judge or a savior over them. They wanted a king like everybody else. And God goes, you want a king? I'll give you a king. He seems like the right guy for the job. you're going to figure out why he's not the right guy for the job.
After David killed Goliath,
Saul actually put him into service,
Yep.
and then wherever David went out, the Lord gave him success.
Yep.
That's why the people were talking about Saul killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s.
Yep, you're right.
Because the people knew what David was doing.
So he wanted his daughter. I mean, one of the prizes of killing Goliath was a daughter, or a wife, right? And it was Saul's daughter, Michal. I'll just call her that because the Hebrew is too hard to, I'm not going to go up here this morning with you for the Hebrew, but it's Michal, all right, in the English. And one of the restraints that was placed on David before he actually got the wife was to go out there and kill some Philistines and bring back their foreskin, which, by the way, gross, right? I mean, how do you count them all? It's just seems like you don't want to do it in the first place. But, he wanted a wife, so there you go. And so he went out there and did double the amount, which, again, even more gross. So, anyway, David was up there now doing his thing. All right, moving on here, we go to the jealous of success of others. We talked about that in a little bit. But also, he kept back a portion of what God had outlawed. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 28 together. First Samuel 28. This one is pretty wild, I'll tell you that. There's some wild stuff in the Old Testament, if you don't know already. One of my favorite classes to do during, COVID was almost done when it comes to how we were restricting it in Charleston. And so we needed a class, and I couldn't think of anything that was too riveting. What do you preach about after COVID? Not disease, not the Exodus story, all the plagues, probably not a good idea. So what do you do? Well, I'm there's some stuff that I've never talked about before in the Bible, because either it's embarrassing or because the story is not PG when it comes to the children being present on Sunday morning. But for more mature people, like all of us that are here this morning, hopefully, then we've got some stuff in there that we never talk about, and the reason why is because of the content. So let's just go there and talk about it. And so this is one of those stories. It's not that wild, but it is interesting because of the way the Bible describes the order of events. So let's go over here. 1 Samuel 28 and verse 5. You got the Philistines again, encamped, verse 4, at Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. So guess what's going to happen? War again. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. So again, just a good description there. One thing that you may not know, but maybe you do, is in the Hebrew language, when you want to emphasize something, you say the exact same thing twice, but in a different way. So we have the same thing in English, if you don't know already. If you go up here and you say, each and every one of you needs to do something. Each and every means the exact same thing, but by saying it twice in a different way, I'm emphasizing to get the point across, right? We were actually, when I was in preaching school, they would call out people for being redundant. And so one of the things they would do is, if we said each and every, each and every mean the exact same thing. So you don't say it twice, you just say it once, as in that Tennessee accent, right? And then when we bust our professors going up there and saying, each and every one of you needs to know when you park in the parking lot, make sure you go to this side, not that side. We go, brother, whoever, you said each and every. He goes, well, I'm trying to emphasize my point. So it's okay for you, but not for us. I get it. So anyway, same thing in the Hebrew language here at verse 5. He was afraid, his heart trembled greatly, means the exact same thing, right, in meaning, but you're saying it twice to emphasize it's a serious problem he's got going on. So what was the root of the issue? What's the root of this situation? God pulled his spirit away, right? He had a distressing spirit from that day forward. His spirit's now going to be resting kind of around David. And so he knows that God's not in his corner, which is a huge deal because the Philistines are, again, going to fight them. So here we go, verse 6. When Saul inquired of the Lord, what does that mean? Tried to ask God, hey, are you going to give us the victory or what? The Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. So let's kind of break that down. God sometimes communicated his will or his commandments or what he was thinking even to some people through dreams. Right? That was a thing that God did back in the day, for sure. The Urim, what is that? Would you say? Dice. Okay. Kind of.
It was like that, and through it, and it would indicate what the answer was. God would.
Yeah, so you got Urim and Thummim, right? These two stones that were round, one is black, one's white. They would use it in some way. We never see them used. So we don't really know for sure how it would take place, but it's kind of like casting lots, right? Whatever that means. A game of chance or whatever to figure out what God's will was. So he tried the Urim and Thummim, which the priest had, the high priest had, and that didn't work. Or by prophets. So he's asking prophets, hey, what's God say about all this combat stuff that's going to take place? No answer. God's not speaking to this guy right now. And then verse 7, then Saul said to his servants, seek out for me a woman who is a medium. What does that mean? Not the size. All right. I got Mona to laugh. Mark this day in your calendar. I got Mona to laugh. She's not a medium. She's a small. No, she's trying to communicate with spirits, right? Is that a real thing or a fake thing?
Well, we're told not to do it, so let's have some matter of proof to it.
It's a fake thing today.
It is fake.
Is it?
Is it?
Because if we're told not to do it, I don't know that it's fake.
Don't do it.
I'm not doing it.
Okay.
I
Anyway.
have a question. Were only women doing it? Because he asked for a woman. Well, you're supposed to know everything.
Who told you that? Not me.
He must have known that this woman was a medium because,
Hang on, don't jump ahead of me.
no, I'm going
Okay.
back.
Oh, you can go back, all
Where it
right.
says that Saul got rid of all the mediums and necromancers in verse 3.
Mm-hmm. Weird, right? They're all gone.
But he knew that this was
Huh.
a medium.
There we go. There you go, Faye. It lead me to my path. All right. That I may go to her and inquire of her. And guess what? His servant said, hey, behold, we just figured out there's a medium in Endor. Right? So he's supposed to wipe out all these people, right? God said so at the beginning, basically. Not to have these people in your camp. They're not going to lead you into my will. They're going to lead you astray. Usually they would have some kind of sacrifice that would be unauthorized by God's word to be able to figure out what the spirits say or the gods say around them. And they're not going to be what God requires. So he says, it'd be great if we had a medium here, right, guys? And they go, well, we happen to know where one was. Well, they should have killed her, but they didn't. So, verse 8, Saul disguised himself, because he has that, glued on mustache. Everyone knows that's biblical. And put on the other garments, and he went. He and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night, just like Nicodemus came to Jesus by night, right? Why? Okay, it's kind of a trick question. Sorry. I'm sorry about this. Why did Nicodemus come to Jesus by night?
In disguise, so people would see him, walk up to him.
Does the Bible say that?
You just asked why, so that was the answer.
All right, is it?
Let
All
me
right.
sing the song to see if I can figure it out.
Okay, sing the song if you want to, quietly to yourself. But no, the point I'm making from all this is to kind of show you that when the scriptures are silent about a subject, the next thing we say as to the reason why is conjecture or speculation, right? Whenever I'm teaching, I try to be as clear as I can about what the scriptures reveal as to be the answer or the reason versus when I'm just speaking for myself. Right? I try to do that very cautiously. So if you disagree with my speculation, there's no problem. There's no issue because I don't know either. I just a good guess. Why did Nicodemus come to Jesus by night? Bible doesn't say. So anything that we say It's just speculation or a guess. It's probably a good guess. Didn't want to be recognized, but we don't have a verse to back it up. So just be aware of that, because some people, when they talk about this kind of thing, it can become tricky when you're talking to someone who really knows their stuff, and you say something as if it's a fact because you've always heard it that way, and they challenge you to back it up with a verse, and you can't. You kind of lose some footing there in that conversation. I've been trapped by that a couple times. I mean, you'd be surprised how many unbelievers know the Bible incredibly well just to kind of trap people like us. So just be aware of it. That's kind of the point I was making about the ending of the book of Mark, right? About how the last half of chapter 16 is not in the oldest manuscripts. And if you didn't know that before you began a conversation about Mark 16:16, the person said, that's not in the Bible anyway, and you're like, what in the world are you talking about? It's right there in black and white. And they go, well, don't you know the manuscripts, the oldest 3, don't have those in those? And you go, of course I knew that, but, whatever. So you kind of lose your footing there in that conversation. So I'm just giving you that little exercise to remind us. So, sure, go ahead, Chris. Maybe it just happened to be nice. Sure. Can't say you're wrong. But, I mean,
You can speculate about anything.
you can, for sure. And he said to her, divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whoever I shall name to you. So what's he asking for? Talk to somebody from the dead. Pretty wild stuff, right? The woman said, surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? Haven't you heard about King Saul? He's going around rounding up all these spirits. Like, well, yeah, I've heard about that. I heard about Saul doing that. Wild, right? Saul swore to her by the Lord. Why not? As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Did he have the right to give that definitive answer? He's swearing by God, first and foremost, probably not a wise thing to do. And he's swearing by God to do a thing that God told him not to do. You're supposed to kill these people, not leave them alive. He goes, well, I swear to you by God, you're going to be okay. Not a good thing. So he has really kind of lost his footing, his place, because he's supposed to be the guy who's the enforcer of God's regulations as the king. He's still king, after all. David's not king yet, not for a good little while. And he is really just starting to go down that slippery slope into perdition. Okay. The woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? And he says, bring up Samuel for me. Because Samuel died, right? And Samuel can't get away from this dude. I mean, he has tried everything, even death. He's like, all right, I'm done. I'm out. Game over. Good luck, Saul. Figure it out. I've given you all the advice that I can. You're not listening. You say you're sorry. You keep doing the same thing over and over again. There's no repentance. I'm out. And he goes. So Saul's like, well, who can I talk to? Who will listen to me? Well, Samuel. I'm sure he's not still mad about the whole Amalek thing. We'll be all right. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. I've heard it said that in the Hebrew looks more like she's shocked or surprised. And maybe this necromancer lady, this medium lady, had never really done the real thing before, but now she saw the real thing and she got a little spooked. I'm not sure how much that's true or not, but whatever the case, she seems a little like, oh, I actually worked? What in the world? The woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. Well, he just made a promise. I'm not going to kill her, so it's all good. The king said, don't be afraid. What do you see? The woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. Now, that God there in the Hebrew, of course, doesn't have capital letters or anything, but we have lowercase g in the English for most translations, I believe. So it sees like something powerful coming up from the earth. He said to her, what is his appearance? He's an old man coming up, and he's wrapped in a robe. Well, gotta be Samuel. Old guy in a robe, gotta be Samuel, just so you know. Saul knew it was Samuel. He bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. Well, you've got no problem paying the correct homage to Samuel, a prophet of God. When it comes to God himself, there's a small problem there, right? Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" There's a whole tangent here that I'm not going to go down too much. I'll go a little bit. The tangent is when it comes to someone's death and then the afterlife before judgment, before the judgment day of all mankind, every time it's talked about in the Hebrew or in the Greek, it seems to indicate a place of great rest. And what I mean by that is literally sleep. Now, the word sleep is used by someone dying in the Hebrew scriptures. They went to rest with their forefathers. And that may be more of a literal idea of their body or their remains are being placed in a place with their forefathers. That's the original intent. But even in the Greek, in the New Testament, it kind of seems that way as well. And so it seems like even from this text, it's consistent with the idea that he was taking a break. He was resting. He was asleep. And now all of a sudden he's awake. He's like, "Saul, what in the world, man? I can't get away from you. What are you doing?" Saul said, "I am in great distress because the Philistines are warring against me. God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. And therefore I've summoned you to tell me what I shall do." I mean, how many times do you have to say the same thing to some people to get them to know the answer is quite simple? I mean, when it comes to the Amalekites, that was the final straw, right? And Samuel even said then, "Listen, no, God's done with you. He's given you a chance and a chance and a chance and a chance. He keeps screwing up. You're not really repenting. You're not listening to his voice at all. You're a bad king. He's done with you. Give it to somebody else. A servant of yours is better than you." And so he brings him back from the dead, so-called, and the answer is like, "Hey, I got some problems down here, Samuel. I know you're resting. Sorry to wake you up, but, I mean, what do I do? The Philistines are here, and God's done with me. What's the answer going to be? Who cares, right?" Samuel says, "Why do you ask me? Since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy, the Lord's done the thing as he spoke by me, because the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out the fierce wrath against Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you today. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." Dead. As a doornail. They're pretty dead, right? Don't talk too much nowadays. So, yeah. I'm sure that wasn't the answer he was hoping for. I mean, he's like, "I want some reassurance. I want some confidence. You know who will give it to me? Samuel, because he always encourages me. Let's go get Samuel again and show him what's going on." He goes, "No, you're going to be dead tomorrow, dude. You're going to be here." That's the answer. Let's see. "The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines." Saul fell at once full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. There was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. That's probably why he's there by all night, right, Chris? "And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, 'Behold, your servant has obeyed you. I've taken my life in my hand. I've listened to what you have said to me. Now, therefore, also obey your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you. Eat, that you may have strength, and you'll go up on your way.' He says, 'No, I don't want to eat.' But his servants," that's kind of paraphrased a little bit, "but his servants together with him urged him. He listened to their words. He rose from the earth and sat on the bed. She killed the fatted calf and then killed it quickly, took flour, kneaded it into baked unleavened breads of it, put it before Saul and the servants. They ate, they rose, and went their way that night." So, pretty wild story, right? The point, I suppose, I was trying to get to about all of this, a little bit more detail than I wanted to get to, but I wanted to read the whole story to you, was that he kept back a portion of what God had outlawed. What had God outlawed? These mediums, these sorcerers, sorceresses, right? So he was supposed to kill them all, and the servants just happened to know where one was. And the application for that for me is that sometimes we know that what God has said is not good for us should be off limits. And sometimes we may have that temptation to have just a little bit saved of that thing that's outlawed by God. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then good for you. But maybe you do. That thing that we know we're not supposed to be doing, that we have just a little bit of, and it makes us feel a little bit safer. The thing that we know God says is not good for us, having that little bit of reserve just in case God doesn't come through is not a good idea. And that was one portion. Yep.
That could also be an issue of trust, not just saving something that God doesn't. Relying on God wholly and saving back something just in case.
Just in case. Now, financially, a cushion to protect yourself and be a good steward is one thing, but to have a whole lot that could be used as a blessing to other people to hear the gospel and achieve their salvation, there's a balance there. And I don't know what it is for you. I don't know your personal lives. I know what I've got, and I know living by faith. You know, the idea of us in preaching school, for example, I was so young and so stupid, I thought it was a great idea to get married and then immediately drive in our Corolla to Memphis to go to school with no furniture, no possessions, nothing really, and also have, what's that? No, it's great. But the plan of us going with no money, no resources, no assets, no job skills for me, and then having $100 a month pledged to us, man. Living large, right? But we made it through that. And we made it through every step of the way. And by the end of the 2 years, we had no doubt, yeah, God's going to take care of people that are busy about His kingdom, for sure. So that was my personal thing. Okay, last of all, this departure from God led to a suicide. And this is a sensitive topic, hopefully, to most people. The idea of someone taking their own life is a very serious thing. And if it has impacted you or your family, then you know just how serious it is. And so I'm not making light of this by any stretch of any imagination, but I will say that the ending of the life of Saul is that the closing remark on his character, right? So 1 Samuel chapter 31, we'll just go there real quick and read the text. I'm in Psalms for some reason. There we go. 1 Samuel 31, beginning in verse 4. We'll just go to verse 2 rather. So 1 Samuel 31, verse 2. The Philistines overtook Saul and his sons. The Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard on Saul. The archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But the armor-bearer would not, because he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. When his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died with his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men on the same day together. The body, of course, wouldn't remain there. The Philistines found the body, and they mistreated it like Saul thought that they would. And eventually it was recovered and buried. So the lesson here, I think at the very end, was he kept going down that road, right? So this entire thing I've entitled, "There's a little bit of Saul in all of us." And what I mean by that is when we think about Saul, overall, he is placed into that villain category because he tried to kill David and he did some bad stuff and he's not a good guy in the Bible. But from looking at the extensive background of where he was when he began as king to where he ended up, there's a very stark contrast between those two. He was a good leader in appearance and his heritage. He had good looks about him. He had a lot of potential. And yet he kept slipping and slipping and slipping and slipping and never recovered. He just kept going down that road to eventually, God didn't give him the victory of the Philistines to kill himself. That was the easy way out for him in that situation. And so the application, I think, is hopefully very clear that for us and for those around us, no matter what you've got going for you at the beginning, if we're consistent in our nature to keep going down the same path time and time again, to make excuses, to keep back a portion of what you know is not right, and to keep making those slips and never really recovering, is not a real growth of character. It shows us that we're going down the wrong path. And in conclusion, think about David. Right? I mentioned it before. David and Bathsheba, that whole situation went way too far for sure. You have a prophet, Nathan, coming to David when David realized that story about that rich man and that poor man was about him taking Uriah's wife. He knew it was over. And he truly repented of that and did all that he could before God to make amends at that point in time. God still had a consequence for him. That child would not live, but we see him described later as a man after God's own heart. Because when he was confronted with the reality of where he had slipped, he owned it, truly repented, and tried to do better. So that's the encouragement for us, is that we can slip and then recover and be more like David than like Saul. Okay, that's it for this. We'll pick up next week, Lord willing, with the Minor Prophets introduction. Thank you for your time and your attention this morning. Hopefully you learned something from it. We'll be dismissed now for 15 minutes before worship begins. What's that?